The region has been viewed as a territorial buffer that separated major competing empires, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Persian Empire, and linked Asia and the Middle East with Europe. Despite the rich and ancient cultures of the region, in the recent past, the South Caucasus attracted the attention of the international community because of several ethnic conflicts, those concerning Nagorno Karabakh, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. These conflicts are considered one of the most important parts of Moscow's foreign policy in the South Caucasus, since they give the Kremlin a chance to act as the arbiter of justice in the region. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 had brought Western attention not only to Eastern Europe, but also to the South Caucasus, mainly due to its vast energy resources that are transported to Europe via Turkey. What are the current political and security dynamics in the South Caucasus? To what extent and under what conditions can Russia bargain with state leaders and influence foreign and security policies in the region? Joining us today are Dr. Alex Crowther, Professor of Practice for Cyber at FIU and Senior Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, Dr. Sandra Fernandez, Researcher at the Research Center of Political Science at the University of Minho, and Dr. Suzanne Loftus, Professor of National Security at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies at Germany and the Deputy Chair of the Strategic Initiatives Department. So just to mention, this event is co-sponsored by Rolf K. Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series. Alex, why wouldn't you start with opening statement, please?
Thank you, Lilia, for the invitation and for allowing me to go first. So the Russian unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has really kind of opened up some opportunities in the southeastern Europe region. And so we need to really think through what our opportunities are, what is the art of the possible. You asked me to talk about the U.S. in the South Caucasus. You notice the U.S. did not really participate in any of the negotiations in the most recent Nagorno Karabakh conflict, staying out, although they're one of the signatories of the original deal. They're working through the OSCE Minsk group on that, and they're very happy to let the OSCE and the UN meet on that. As a matter of fact, I met with the OSCE delegation and the deputy at the UN for the South Caucasus here at the Romanian embassy a couple of months ago to talk about it. And so the US has more of a hands-off. Not that the U.S. is ignoring the southern area there, but they certainly don't want to take any sides. In Georgia, the United States is not all in like Ukraine, but certainly very supportive of Georgia. Georgia sent troops to Iraq in support of the American deployment. They had 2,300 troops on the ground there. The U.S. Flew them all back to participate in the 2008 war, where the Russians did yet another unprovoked invasion of a neighbor. And then they participated in Afghanistan as well. They had 11,000 people on the ground. So the U.S. supports Georgia very strongly, but it's physically impossible to support them as much as we support Ukraine. So what opportunities have arisen here because of the recent Russian invasion? Perhaps we could get Azerbaijan and Armenia to actually make a deal based on the status quo ante of 1991. It's everything has shifted. You know, the Armenians were winning and had rested on their laurels, where the Azerbaijanis were just kind of irritated. And so they very carefully built up their capability and defeated the Armenians. Now that both sides have tasted defeat, this is our opportunity. I published an op-ed at the Center for European Policy Analysis recently calling for Moldova to think about taming Transnistria. It might be time to take them in. Because they're very unhappy with their patron, the Russians, and there's a framework for that. Just like there's a framework in Nagorno Karabakh, there's also a framework in Transnistria, and of course the Ukrainians we're seeing in the news today that the Ukrainians are actually getting ready to take the offensive in the Kherson area, southeast of Odessa, and 89% of the Ukrainian people say no territorial concessions. 82% say we don't even want to recognize Crimea and the two breakaway republics. And then just yesterday in the news, the Ukrainians said that they want back to the 1991 border. Right? They believe this war will be over when they return to the 1991 border. So these are tremendous opportunities to finish off these frozen conflicts. But what's the one frozen conflict I haven't mentioned? Georgia, because honestly, I don't see an opportunity here to resolve this. And when you talk about Moldova, it's physically isolated from Russia. When you talk about Ukraine, it's next to Russia, but there's 3 NATO countries bordering on Ukraine, and munitions and everything else is pouring into Ukraine. Georgia is physically isolated. We just can't get anything to Georgia. You can fly airplanes in, but you can't fly in really large weapon systems and lots of ammunition in a C-17, for instance. And if you think the Russians have Odessa sewed up, preventing the grain export, wait until we try to bring shiploads of munitions into Georgia. And then you're going to see some bad things happen right there. So I think it's kind of important right now that we convince the Georgians that maybe they shouldn't be pushing very hard right now to resolve this issue, because honestly, when this is over, Vladimir Putin's going to be in a really bad mood, and he's going to want to strike out at someone. Notice when he does these foreign adventures, much like the Argentine junta, everything was falling apart at home, so they did a foreign adventure. And so where can Putin do a foreign adventure? He's certainly not going to mess with Finland or any of the NATO states, and Georgia is really kind of the top of the list. So I would bet that Vladimir Putin's going to be looking for something to regain his reputation as a brilliant strategist, and Georgia might be the place that he wants to do that. And so we really want to warn the Georgians to not push the Russians. I'm not a don't poke the bear person, but I think the reality, the geostrategic reality of Georgia just makes it really tough for them to be able to resolve their frozen conflict. So the other 3, I think we have an opportunity to resolve. I don't see it happening in Georgia.
Thank you very much, Alex. So now, Sandra, please give us an update on the EU's renewed policies toward the South Caucasus and the recent peace initiative of European Council's President, Charles Michel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Lilia, for this opportunity and this discussion on a very important issue, as the new strategic environment is here. It's not clear where we are heading to, and certainly the South Caucasus is part of it and very close to the effects that we might expect from the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So I will start by saying that I do not consider myself a specialist of the South Caucasus. So my contribution today will really be on the trying to give some hints on the EU side and what does this new context means for the engagement in the South Caucasus. So I will give first a kind of very macro perspective on where do we come from concerning the EU engagement in the South Caucasus, what are the key dimensions and the key flows, and what can we expect as developments concerning this new environment for the South Caucasus, including the 3 countries of this region. So yes, roughly a month ago, on May 22, something happened, because concerning Nagorno Karabakh, a meeting was settled in Brussels. So a clear signal that the EU was seen as an honest broker as compared to the Russian involvement that is really seen from the military perspective. So it was a signal. I'm not sure about the real outreach of this, but certainly a signal that the EU was kind of back in the game at the diplomatic level and also considered as a playground to engage between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But as I said, my initial talk will be about trying to explain where and how the South Caucasus fits in the EU external action, in particular in the renewed and totally changed context of the Ukrainian war. If we look at official positions of last year, for instance, Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union, kind of ambassador of the EU, he recalled key dimensions of the EU engagement in the South Caucasus, and also he brought to the upfront the need for the EU to be an active player to promote conflict resolution in the region. And this is one of the dimensions that has been really a critic for the EU, that the EU was not sufficiently engaging in conflict resolution in the region. Also, some instruments, very important instruments and financement were put on the table through the Eastern Partnership. And specific goals for the Eastern Partnership were settled for 2025. And some key targets were defined to try to boost the engagements of the EU in the regions and in these countries, but also for bilateral relationships with these countries. But the focus, as far as I can see, it was really on connectivity in the region, because it's really seen by the EU as a crossroads between Europe and Central Asia, and also bordering the wider Middle East. So I could see in the EU narrative a lot of emphasis on the transport corridors linking the EU with Asia, and also on the diversification of energy resources for the EU. So the fact of addressing the conflicts in the Eastern neighborhood was really something that was missing and has been entering, at least recently, more in the narrative of the EU. And now with the war in Ukraine, it is totally at the forefront of at least of the concerns. But if we look at the literature on how the EU has been engaging with the South Caucasus, it's clear that a mismatch has been identified in the bulk of literature on EU relations with the South Caucasus, a mismatch between what is the EU toolbox, what are the instruments, and what are the expectations domestically of the Eastern Partnership countries, which include the South Caucasus, which are part of the Eastern Partnership Initiative of the European Union, which is the key policy of the EU towards the region and the Eastern partners. So there is a sense that this mismatch has brought a lot of delusions by these countries, and also the fact that differentiation that has been introduced as a principle from the EU side. So basically around 2015, the EU has changed the approach. Instead of one approach fits all, the EU has changed to differentiation. So each country has its own path and own, let's say, a tailor-made program. It has not been a solution really for the European Union to have more visibility in the region. There is an issue with the EU's visibility and attractiveness also in the region to promote the necessary reforms from the domestic perspective. And as I said earlier, the main flaw in my point of view is also that the security needs of these countries have not been addressed by the European Union at all. So all in all, the literature has also pointed to the fact that the EU has somehow raised wrong expectations in these countries. And I would agree on one dimension of what Alex has just brought to the conversation in a more optimistic tone, is that now there is an opportunity to change this because of this new context brought by the Ukrainian war, that the EU raises now the right expectations in these countries. And if we look at the European Union, the European Union is now going through a huge reality check in terms of time and in terms of what is the European Union's power. Time, because there is no time left. There is no time to wait for the right moment for reforms. And the key dimension that now are in this reality check is energy and defense. So energy and defense. So this is why we might expect that concerning the South Caucasus, energy and defense might impact the EU relations with the South Caucasus. And also an important dimension when we talk about the defense dimension of the European Union, now it is also clearly about defending democracy and freedom, because values, the normative dimension of what's going on around the reconfiguration of strategic relations in Europe is connected to values such as democracy and freedom. And this all boils down to a very important country, that is Russia. And now, before I go to a more micro perspective on the EU relations towards the South Caucasus, just let me add I think, a new term in the narrative of the European Union that is key. And I think that the European Union is probably going to try to reach out to the South Caucasus, to the Balkans with this new narrative. This is the narrative of the European family. So the idea that there is a European family and that the European Union should help countries to join this European family, be it with enlargement, be it with other tools, is really key today. And it's a very strong reaction to the war and to supporting Ukraine as well. So the question for me, I think, which is a key political question, if you look at the South Caucasus, is this idea of European family going to embrace all the potential Ukraines of the post-Soviet space, meaning the South Caucasus, but also the Balkans as well, which is not really post-Soviet space as such, but still included in these countries that have been deceived by the non-enlargement perspectives offered by the EU until now. So going back to the EU and the South Caucasus, two key instruments, the neighborhood policy that has been updated in 2009 into the Eastern Partnership. And when we talk about EU engagement with third actors, the EU is a patchwork of member states with different risk assessments and different geopolitical understandings. And if it is true that the war in Ukraine has somehow solved, and we have seen it as well with the new NATO concept that has been approved last week, that, okay, there is now a greater cohesion around the understanding of Russia as a threat, but still it doesn't mean that these countries do not have their own sensitivities. And if we look at the sixth package of sanctions, that is the last one that the EU has approved, and the issue of approving an oil embargo on importations from Russia, we see that there are differences among member states because they don't have the same geographical position, they don't have the same interests. So it's part of the EU, it's important to understand this. But some member states have been really active. I would talk about some activism of specific member states. Before the war, before this war of 2022, they were very, very active with an understanding there is a historical duty from the EU to give perspectives to the South Caucasus and to all the countries of the Eastern Partnership, because there is a common understanding also of existential threats coming from Russia. And I will just give quick examples because I think my time is almost finishing. I will give quick examples, and I've chosen on purpose a very small country, Estonia. Estonia is a microstate, and this is to show how important are each member states of the European Union, and also because many decisions are taken by unanimity. When we talk about external action. If we look at a very small country as Estonia, it has been one of the countries which has been very active in promoting approximation to the South Caucasus and opening up the perspectives of enlargement of these countries to the European Union. And we can see it particularly after the Russian-Georgian War of August 2008, and then after the annexation of Crimea. For a country as Estonia, who more or less share the same vision concerning these matters as the other two Baltic states, Lithuania and Latvia, and also Poland, we can see that even in policies that we would not expect to see South Caucasus directly, this country has been trying to use EU money to boost democracy and reforms in this country with this vision of giving perspective of these countries to cut relations with Russia. This is clearly a mindset that we can find there. I have a book chapter published this year in Routledge precisely on the role of Estonia and how the Eastern partners, or how the policy, the neighborhood policy and the Eastern Partnership has been somehow boosted, let's say, by a country as Estonia. And for instance, if you look at EU development cooperation and the way Estonia has directed its budget, we can see clearly that instead of applying some key principles as reducing poverty in developing countries or poor countries, Estonia has directed this budget towards countries as Georgia, Armenia, precisely because it understands that its bilateral assistance, even under the auspices of the EU development cooperation, Estonia understands that it needs to support Eastern Partnership countries to seek closer ties with the European Union. This has not been, of course, as we know, the understanding of the big member states of the European Union, but just to show how this dynamic internally now is probably gaining more momentum because of the war. So these voices, these are understandings of these specific member states are probable to now spill over more rapidly to understanding to reach out as well to the South Caucasus, because there is this understanding that the European Union needs to give this perspective to these countries. So to wrap up, countries as Estonia inside the European Union have raised, have tried to raise the other member states' awareness about the consequences of Russia's actions in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus. This is traceable. There is a literature on that. And I think that in policy-oriented terms, this activism will now be, will have more traction because of the new context we are living in. But that being said, it does not solve the problem that already existing instruments probably do not serve for the new geopolitical goals of the European Union, and that creativity is needed. And this is clear if you look at the perspective of enlargement of Ukraine, that is now politically accepted, but in concrete terms, we have no clue yet of how it will be handled in a proper timetable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for this detailed assessment of the EU's policies in the South Caucasus. Suzanne, to what extent and under what conditions can Russia bargain with state leaders and influence foreign and security policies in the South Caucasus?
Thank you very much for your kind introduction and for inviting me to speak to all of you today. I'm happy to address Russian policy in the South Caucasus. So in general, just to understand Russia's kind of global policy is that it views the international arena as a series of camps, and each is centered by a power whose greatness is confirmed by having a camp. So let's say the West has NATO and the EU, and that's a camp. And Russia, because of its self-perception as a great power historically and always aspired to be a great power again, was keen to ensure that the post-Soviet space after the Cold War would eventually kind of return to being integrated with Russia as a leader. So they formed different institutions such as the Commonwealth of Independent States, which Azerbaijan and Armenia joined at its inception in 1991. Georgia reluctantly acceded in 1993 and withdrew from it eventually in 2008 after the Russo-Georgian War. Russia also formed the Collective Security Treaty, which then became Collective Security Treaty Organization. In 2002, it was renamed. And this was kind of designed as a counterweight to NATO. Armenia joined to relieve its security concerns with regards to Turkey, but Azerbaijan and Georgia did not. Then there was the Eurasian Customs Union, officially formed in 2000, but active from 2010 onward. This also included Armenia, but not Azerbaijan or Georgia. And then this was also renamed into the Eurasian Economic Union in 2014 to kind of be a mirror image of the EU. So Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia are all very different, and they have a variety of attitudes towards Russia and also Moscow's rule throughout both imperial and Soviet times. For centuries, Armenia has sought Russia's protection against Turkey and Iran, which ruled most of the Armenian historic homelands. This security concern was especially important after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Soviet army had disappeared and it left the Turkish Third Army as the most potent military force in the wider region. In general, post-Soviet Russia views Armenia as its closest friend in the region. There is a large and influential Armenian diaspora in Russia, and that has enabled those positive feelings to remain. Azerbaijani elites have also largely been friendly to Russia. The former president, Heydar Aliyev, he rose through the ranks of the Soviet KGB and had no issues with the presidents of Russia after the USSR fell. And this was in contrast to all the nationalist sentiments we saw around the post-Soviet space in the years immediately after the collapse. So both Armenia and Azerbaijan have incorporated friendly relations with Russia into a wider strategy that was called a multi-vectoral approach. So seeking both close relations with Russia, but also with the United States and the European Union, kind of a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy. Whereas with Georgia, nationalism remained centered on the rejection of Russia. Georgian society largely came to view Russia as an occupier. So there was, a stage set for how Russia would approach this region from the beginning. It was a force balancing posture. It was trying to preserve its traditional friendship and alliance with Armenia without harming its economic and security relations with Azerbaijan, and also a kind of constantly emotional and deepening hostility towards Georgia. So while Azerbaijan generally deals with other countries transactionally, another very important factor in how it deals with countries is their stance on Armenia and the Karabakh conflict. And this is the most tricky situation for Russia to manage in that region. As Azerbaijan is Russia's largest trading partner, the two countries have very important common issues regarding hydrocarbons. And Russia sees a strategic aim in keeping Azerbaijan out of the Western camp that we discussed in the beginning. So while supporting Armenia, it tries to avoid alienating Azerbaijan at the same time. And with this balancing act, it has also been involved in the mediation processes of this conflict. Co-chair of the Minsk Group, as Alex mentioned, Minsk Group is headed by, was or is France, Russia, and the United States, but also there's some supporting nations: Belarus, Finland, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So Russia's relations with Georgia quickly went into a downward spiral after the Soviet collapse. Russia used substantial military force to ensure the survival and then the victory of the separatist rebellions in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and also installed a Russian peacekeeping force. And then, as everyone knows, in 2008, the tension flared again in South Ossetia, and then Russia invaded and defeated the Georgian forces rather quickly. And this occurred at a very interesting time, let's say, after the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008, but also after Kosovo had gained its independence. Russia kind of thought it appropriate to recognize Abkhazia and South Ossetia in a reaction to these, to NATO membership, to Georgia's aspirations to receive a NATO membership action plan and to the international acknowledgement of, or partial acknowledgement of, Kosovo's independence, which Russia really opposed. So as with Armenia, in terms of how much pressure and influence it has economically, it tried to influence former President Sargsyan, sorry for the pronunciation, into repudiating the EU associations agreements that Armenia was attempting to join back in 2013, and instead joined the Russia-centric Eurasian Economic Union. Sargsyan explained to the nation that because of Armenia's security concerns, it was necessary to join this organization, and sort of argued it that way. Whereas negotiations with the EU did still continue, though. Eventually, in 2017, they reached an agreement, a comprehensive and enhanced partnership with the EU. So it still collaborates with the EU in some economic domains, but does not contradict the obligations towards the Eurasian Economic Union. So because of this lack of contradiction, Moscow didn't object to this treaty that was signed, or agreement. So as the president was facing term limits, and it was about to expire in 2018, Sargsyan established a parliamentary system and turned the presidency into a figurehead, and then became prime minister. And this deeply aggravated the Armenian society, who rose up in demonstrations, and he was ousted immediately. And then the opposition leader, Nikol Pashinyan, was installed as acting prime minister, and then new elections took place later in the year. And this kind of seems similar to these color revolutions we hear so much about, that Putin has disdain for, rather, in Georgia, Syria, Ukraine, and other places. But instead of condemning Pashinyan and supporting Sargsyan, who was actually one of Putin's most loyal supporters, Putin remained rather restrained after this. And that was probably due to Pashinyan's efforts to reassure Putin that Russia remained the guarantor of, because of Russia remained the guarantor of Armenia's security, it was in the interest of Armenia to continue to collaborate with Russia. And that, creating a rift with Russia would create a vulnerability that Azerbaijan could exploit with regard to Karabakh. And that for this reason, Putin and Armenia, or Russia and Armenia rather, did not suffer, major strains in their relations. Azerbaijan is the type of country which Putin seems to feel comfortable with. It's a stable autocracy, cautious rulers, pursues consistent, predictable policies. Azerbaijan has also rejected all forms of multilateral cooperation that involves Armenia. So, for example, as we saw in the beginning, it didn't join the CSTO. And this really puts a limit on the extent of the rapprochement with Russia. So it's a nation that is not in any camp. And one of the reasons why it's not joining the CSTO is because then it would have to renounce any type of military action or solution to the Karabakh conflict, which it clearly views as the only credible solution to pressure Armenia into negotiations. It hasn't joined the EAEU, so the Eurasian Economic Union, whereas Armenia did. Maybe that's also due to kind of limiting, because it could limit its abilities to use economic leverage internationally to support its stance on Karabakh. And also the very large Armenian diaspora, which is very influential in the West, particularly in the US and France. So because of the war in Ukraine, there's been quite a reaction, and it's causing much more tensions in the region of the South Caucasus. So Georgia now has become even more ingrained in the Western camp. So it took a clear side in the war. And the war also shifted Russia's military focus away from the Caucasus, where it's traditionally acting as the security guarantor for the unrecognized states. The Nagorno Karabakh region, as you've heard, has seen several military clashes since the start of the Ukraine war. Some attribute this to Azerbaijan using this as a window of opportunity to reach some tactical goals there. And before the war, Putin and Azeri President Ilham Aliyev signed a new friendship and cooperation agreement. And the president, or Aliyev, declared that the signing of this declaration brings Moscow and Baku's relations to the level of an alliance. So now Russia has, two allies of the three South Caucasus states, even though those two are in a protracted conflict over Nagorno Karabakh. And it's very tricky for both Armenia and Azerbaijan diplomatically right now due to the war about how to take sides or not to take sides. Azerbaijan, for example, chose not to vote in all three United Nations General Assembly resolutions condemning Russian actions in Ukraine. And Armenia has tried to remain as neutral as possible, abstaining from two of the UNGA resolutions condemning Russia and not voting on the third. But at the same time, visiting Russia and stating that it's in Yerevan's interest to boosting its alliance with Moscow, a statement that was that hadn't gone unnoticed in the West. At the same time, Azerbaijan has a historical strong relationship with Ukraine. So since Ukraine voiced support for Azerbaijan's internationally recognized territory in the Nagorno Karabakh conflict, and rather than publicly supporting the war, Azerbaijan quietly sends humanitarian aid and fuel to Ukraine and tries to maintain a careful balance between the two partners. It decided to not show up to the vote of the Council of Europe on terminating Russian membership also. And Armenia is even in a more difficult situation. It's a member of the CSTO. It hosts up to 10,000 Russian soldiers on its territory, has a Russian military base, border guards, peacekeeping force now. As of 2020, part of that agreement was that Russia would keep a force there up until 2025. So it's in the interest of Armenia to make sure that this peacekeeping force is extended, because the departure of this mission could open the road for Azerbaijani to hostilities or to retake all of the lost territory. But at the same time, Armenia wants to remain close with the EU and have good ties with them, but is not eager to support Ukraine too blatantly because of Kyiv's past support for Azerbaijan. So as a result, Armenia mostly signals its support for Russia without alienating the West. It voted against revoking Russia's membership in the Council of Europe and abstained in votes suspending Russia from the UN Human Rights Council and condemning Russia in the UN General Assembly. It has not recognized the independence of the breakaway regions, though, and is also welcoming refugees from the war. Georgia, on the other hand, is also in a difficult position, although differently. It's still heavily reliant on Russia for trade, but the popular sentiment in Georgia favors Ukraine, but the government has taken a measured stance. It's aware of its vulnerabilities to Russian military actions due to the conflicts over the two separatist regions. For example, after the global sanctions were announced against Russia, the Prime Minister Garibashvili said that these were not effective means to stop the bombing of Ukraine and said that Georgia would not take part in them. But despite this, it is prioritizing its relationship with the West. It's pursuing both NATO and EU membership and voted to expel Russia from the Council of Europe and to condemn Russian actions in support of the International Criminal Court's investigation of the Russian war crimes also. So, to kind of wrap all that up, what extent can Russia really influence policies in the South Caucasus? It has a limited ability in Azerbaijan, but it's stronger than the Western influence. It sells weapons to Azerbaijan. There's a large Azerbaijani diaspora inside Russia. Remittances are really high and supportive of people in Azerbaijan. But Russia also, with Iran, intensively seeks to reach an agreement with other Caspian Sea littoral states, such as Azerbaijan, to forbid, for example, other foreign military presence in this body of water without a basis of consensus for large infrastructure projects, for example. So it has some sway in that respect. With Armenia, it has a strong sway. Armenia is heavily dependent on Russian energy, oil, and gas supplies. This allows Russia to implement a carrot and stick approach towards Armenia. Armenia receives preferential treatment in returns for its loyalty. And another example is that Putin could have reacted badly to the revolution in 2018, but it didn't because of that pragmatic relationship and this balancing act. In Georgia, the influence of Russia is rather limited, but strong enough to invite pragmatism still from the Georgian government. There is the largest Georgian diaspora lives in Russia, and also there's very high flow of remittances from Russia to Georgia. Russia's reaction to Georgia's associations agreement with the EU, though, was actually quite rational. It didn't, initially it might have had some hiccups, but it just kind of let it go. And it still possesses these strong leverage mechanisms to prevent very unpredictable moves on Georgia's part. And Georgia, does not want to irritate Russia either, and will also try to balance in both directions. So the region just really seems like there are a lot of differing actors, differing interests, and that it seems to remain in everyone's interest to balance everybody else's interests and not to create too much instability and chaos. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Absolutely. The issue is actually very complex, as you mentioned, and all three South Caucasian states are in a very difficult position now because of the war in Ukraine. Alex, now we are opening the floor for questions, but Alex did have some question, I believe, to Sandra, right? Alex, please go.
Yes, the European Union is getting involved in the security aspect here, but I'm not seeing any discussion about Article 222, which is the solidarity article, or Article 42.7, the mutual assistance article in the European Union Treaty. Are these no longer in play? I mean, they're still on the books, but is the European Union kind of ignoring this, or what?
Well, the European Union is usually highly criticized for not being the kind of player everyone would like it to be. So I think that what's happening right now is, as I said, a wake-up call, which came before the war, but now there is like a no going back. There is no time left, let's say. And something I didn't mention was the fact that some countries in the EU were also very worried by the sense that the United States were leaving Europe. So I think that we can only understand why the European Union the European Union adjustments also in parallel to another organization where many member states of the EU are also member states, NATO. And anyway, it's very clear for the European Union that there is a solidarity clause among member states that shall be activated when needed, and that now the EU is investing in having more political cohesion, but also instruments of action. So I don't see any contradiction or any sense of something that is not activated. I would not see it that way. I think that this is a transitional moment, and that in the sense of a historical moment that is happening very fast. And the problem are not the articles. The problem was really about the willingness to act as a group and to have instruments for these 27 member states to act together. And anyway, the basic principle of complementarity and no duplication with NATO is key since decades and will continue to be key for the European Union.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Alex. So we do have a couple of questions. The first one, do you believe that the Russian invasion of Ukraine increases the danger that ethnic conflicts in the South Caucasus might relapse into violence as well? Or does it create a window of opportunity for the United States and Europe to press for a diplomatic resolution to the conflicts? Alex, I will start with you. Just 2 minutes.
I see this as a tremendous opportunity. The Russians are looking in the other direction, and so their eye is off the ball, as it were. And so I think that we have a tremendous opportunity to resolve 3 of the 4 frozen conflicts in the area.
Thank you, Alex. Sandra, Suzanne, do you agree, disagree? Do you also think that it's a great opportunity, or it can be, you know, turned into something more violent?
I don't, it's up to me or Suzanne?
Oh, Sandra, please go ahead, and then Suzanne.
Okay. Well, it's a very broad question. I think it really need to look at it in different dimensions. It depends on what we are talking about. But I think that in principle, what can be seen as an opportunity is precisely the opportunity to solve missed opportunities of the past. And I think that the current situation has shared responsibilities, but now it's time to act and to introduce changes to manage the new strategic environment. So in that sense, yes, it's an opportunity, but at the same time, it can't be made on something that is unreal. Russia is there, it will be there, it will not change location. It's even if Russia has been re-identifying itself and its external action as an Eurasian country, still it has an European dimension that needs to be worked out with the Russians themselves. So I think this is the question of what is short, medium, and long-term opportunity, and how to reach out to the long-term opportunities for the countries of for the South Caucasus, for countries as Moldova and Ukraine, mainly Ukraine now that is under war, but also in the relationship with Russia. So in principle, yes, it depends on what we are talking about, and it depends on the time perspective that we have on this. But I think it's truly an opportunity for the transatlantic relationship. This is something, for instance, that for a country as Portugal, where I'm based, is very important to regain a sense of community on both sides of the Atlantic.
Thank you, Sandra. Suzanne?
Well, as it pertains to the conflicts in Georgia, I don't think we're going to see any type of violence actually reignited in that area. It's in everyone's interest to avoid that. But as we saw in the last few months, I mean, this invasion has seemed to embolden Azerbaijan a little bit, and there's been some tensions in the region again flaring up. Also with this Minsk group kind of last time not being so present at the negotiations, now there's different avenues of negotiation going on, and it could either be, you know, a good thing, or it could, you know, be a bad thing, in the sense that it would create competition between the different groups that are trying to navigate this peace negotiation. But ultimately, now Armenia and Azerbaijan are discussing more with the help of the EU, which is good, more kind of economic issues, things that are not so focused on the status of the Armenian population in Karabakh, but rather more on less difficult issues, which leaves an avenue for kind of creating a better environment that would potentially lead to better negotiations later on. So I think it could be viewed in an opportunistic way as well.
Thank you. And next question. So we have a question from Lasha Kasradze. Do you think the nuclear threat is something to be concerned about? Who would like to go first?
Yes.
Alex.
Yes, it is something to worry about. If Putin feels like he's backed into a corner, he could. The Russians have a doctrine called escalate to de-escalate. It's where they've made their maximal gains, and the pressure is starting to force them back. So in order to maintain those gains, they escalate by deploying perhaps a tactical nuclear warhead just to signal everybody that they're serious, because they think the West will back off if that happens.
Thank you. Sandra, Susan?
Yeah, on nuclear
yes.
threat. Well, this was a very hot topic, and it was all over the place. Let's say in March, right? In March, I think that the countries you all are living in, it was really very central. It was in the media everywhere, and then we are not talking that much about it because of the third phase of the tactical reorientation of Russia on the ground in Ukraine. But in strategic terms, yes, it is a threat because first it exists. It's a weapon that is at disposal. And the logic of nuclear dissuasion is today quite different as compared to the Cold War times. And also the modernization, the fact that nuclear weapons are more tactical and smaller somehow makes the use of them look rational, or may look rational, even if it's still irrational. But the truth is that we have no clue about the effects because it has never been used. We have only one historical case in August 1945 in Japan for the surrender of Japan at the time. So, but the risk exists, yes, because the war might still escalate, and it's upon the decision of a leader that clearly is acting each time more in an isolated bubble. So, unfortunately, the blunt answer from my side is yes as well.
Susan, would you like to add something?
Just briefly, I mean, it's always something to be concerned about. We should never forget about this threat. Just one thing that maybe would make Russia not use one, though, however, is the fact that right now it has certain friends left. You know, it has China left, it has India left, Brazil, South Africa. So it's not completely isolated yet. But if it does use a nuke, it will be isolated. So it will go from whatever it is now to being a type of North Korea state, which is most likely not in its interest to do so. So I would think they would avoid using one until they really had to, which is basically if this escalates beyond where it needs to.
Thank you, Susan. So we have another question. Both Russia and Turkey are exploiting the opportunities they saw to expand their control and influence in the region. Turkey is back to the region after a century of absence. The West was almost absent from the recent situation in Nagorno Karabakh. The Minsk group, which includes the United States, as was already mentioned, and France, along with Russia, monitors a ceasefire agreement that was signed in 1994 by Armenia, Azerbaijan, and de facto state Nagorno Karabakh. But the group played no role in the new ceasefire, which was signed in November of 2020. This means that the new agreement signed in November 2020 was negotiated on Russia's and Turkey's terms without any regard for the Minsk group's 28 plus years of effort, albeit unsuccessful, to achieve a comprehensive settlement of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. What is your take on that? Alex, and we will start with you. We just have 5 minutes left, so if each of you can devote 2 minutes to this question, I will really appreciate that.
The OSCE and the United Nations are still eyeball deep in this. So France and US may not be, I think it's a great idea to involve the regional powers, because the more people you have bought into this, the more stable it's going to be.
Thank you, Alex. Sandra.
Well, I will answer from an EU perspective on this. The European Union is really conscious that it has a lot of competitors, as also Suzanne clearly really well explored on Russia, but also Turkey, Iran, China. So there are a lot of players there, and to find room and space for diplomacy and to use instruments to be also an active player is something that the EU has not been a very good player. Why? Because it came into the South Caucasus quite late. If we look at the beginning of the 2000s, there was not much EU interest to engage in South Caucasus. And then despite the boost given by namely enlargement and the perspectives of countries as Estonia, there was a sense of losing interest. And now, because of Nagorno Karabakh, back to the region. So I think it's a very difficult region with a lot of balancing among regional and the global players. So the EU is one among them, and I'm not sure about the leverages that it really has to play there.
Thank you, Sandra. Suzanne?
Well, the fact that the Minsk group was quite sidelined during the Second Karabakh War in 2020, it says a lot, you know, that the West was absent. There was other players there kind of sorting out the situation. It also confirmed Azerbaijan's recovery of the districts, and Turkey's role was also amplified, and it serves as kind of a check on Russian operations as well, balancing out Russian dominance in the region. And it was basically because of the strong military support from Turkey to Azerbaijan that, you know, they were able to do this. So now it's got a much larger role in the South Caucasus, and it kind of replaced the West and the, you know, the US and France by managing this conflict. And also at the same time, Russia boosted its role in the region too, because previously this was the only frozen conflict without Russian boots on the ground, but now there are, and both Azerbaijan and Armenia rely on those troops for stability now. So it does look like a greater role for Russia in the region. And then just between Russia and Turkey, this highlights their role very much, because they had to kind of learn how to share the neighborhood. You know, they don't exactly have the same interests, but at the same time, they're both there and present and kind of need to accept each other's presence. So it's a complex balancing act yet again.
Thank you, Suzanne. So 1 minute wrap up from each of you guys by answering the following question. What are the future political and security dynamics in the South Caucasus, given the power struggle between Russia, Turkey, Iran? We haven't mentioned Iran yet, US and the EU. Alex, and we will start with you.
So none of those powers are going away anytime soon. The only major change that could come out of the current situation would be a diminished Russia, both economically and militarily, which will then embolden Iran and Turkey. And so I think we're going to see more, not necessarily conflict, but more competition in the area.
Thank you, Alex. Sandra?
Yes, I agree with Alex on the, well, first competition, growing competition, and also building on Suzanne's very interesting talk on the balancing, the continuous multifactorial and balancing relationship among the three countries and the relationship with these countries, with Russia and with the other neighbors, namely Turkey and Iran. And let's not forget China as well, with high interest, as the crossroad with the connectivity that is needed for the Belt and Road Initiative. So this thing will somehow keep some kind of balancing going on in the region. But at the same time, I think the evolution will be really tied to, first, how much military presence the Russian state will be able to keep in the region. This is, I think, the principal asset of Russia right now. This is a military presence, and also in accordance with the kind of convenient relationship that it will settle with Turkey and China and continue to have with Iran, because it will also determine the political capacity of Russia to influence these countries' destiny, because it's really related to the military presence as well. And the example that you started with the May meeting in Brussels shows that there is openness for other diplomatic forums, also with limited effects right now, but still, I think it will depend on military presence of Russia and how much isolated it will be because of the Ukrainian situation.
Thank you, Sandra. Suzanne, please.
Yes, so the future is definitely kind of you're going to see multiple powers there with different vested interests. Back in the 90s, it was, the West was the big player in town, and it increased its influence even after the 9/11 attacks. But it was kind of short-lived. Now it's focusing more on the Indo-Pacific, and also just kind of has other priorities. And the EU, it supports the region, of course, but it has also its own issues with EU expansion fatigue and the war in Ukraine now, and Brexit and Euro crisis, just a lot of different things happening there that we see kind of Turkey's expanding role, and it has to balance also, Turkey has to balance with Russia's role, and then also Iran is now asserting itself in the region, but the actors in the region are very mistrusting of Iran's influence in the region, Russia's influence, Turkey's influence, without having enough influence from the West to balance those out. So the West, must still, of course, be involved in terms of helping stabilizing the region, helping to promote good governance in the countries that want that, but at the same time recognize the role of other players, and that just not be so domineering either in the region, which it's not anyway. So I think it'll be just kind of, if the region wants to stay stable, they'll need to balance out all those actors in this multi-vectoral approach I mentioned.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Just, to sum up, I do believe that the balance of power struggle that we see now in the South Caucasus is going to continue, because even recently, Russia announced that the Minsk group is dead. France and the United States, they say that it's pretty much alive, and it will continue settle the Nagorno Karabakh conflict within the Minsk group framework. So as we can see, the situation is complex, as you all mentioned, and it will continue to remain as such. So I would like to say a huge thank to all of you for joining our webinar, The New Great Power Context in the South Caucasus, which is a part of the European and Eurasian Studies Program and the Caucasus Security Studies Initiative. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today, and you all have a great day. Thank you.